joined now from Washington by Sigurd Neubauer, an expert on GCC states, formerly with the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C. Hi, Sigurd, how are you?
It's a pleasure to be with you
It's
today,
a pleasure
Yoav.
to host you here in our studio. How do you assess the current situation? What's going on in there?
The current situation is extraordinarily dangerous from a geopolitical point of view because it is very clear that the Iranians are most likely behind the latest string of attacks in the Persian Gulf. And it's also very clear that the Iranians do not know how to respond to President Trump's diplomatic and economic pressure, which essentially leaves the government in Tehran backed into a corner in which it has not yet figured out how to, on one hand, engage with the president, and on the other hand, defend its security interest within the region.
You know the Iranians quite well, much better than I do. What do they want to reach at the end? I understand they don't understand the Americans, but they don't want to break, you know, all rules because they're afraid of the outcome, probably.
The Iranians, like much of the international community, has had a difficult time adjusting to the American president's style of diplomacy. And precisely because there has been so much freewheeling, the Iranians will have a very difficult time understanding on how to relate to the present administration, because there are outside groups in Washington that are actively pushing for regime change. And certainly that is what the Iranians believe. Starting
from next month, from July, they are going to enrich uranium for a higher level. What does that mean?
This is part of an expected move. I think what is important to understand is that there's a very narrow opportunity for diplomacy to resolve the present crisis, and the diplomatic opportunity is not between the United States and Iran, but rather between Iran, Oman, and Israel. We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu paid Oman a visit in October of last year, and it is expected that not only was the Iranian issue discussed at that time, but it is also understood widely in Washington and elsewhere that any understanding that is reached between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Iranians will ultimately be accepted by President Trump. So the diplomatic opportunity right now is very narrow, and that is some sort of a direct channel spearheaded by Oman between Israel and Iran.
Looking on the Gulf states, looking at Saudi, the UAE and others, how do they see the current situation? Because at the end of the day, they have ships coming to their ports being bombed. So what do they think of the situation?
Well, as we know, the Gulf states are quite divided amongst themselves on how to engage with Iran or not. What unifies the Gulf states is that they're all united when it comes to wanting to see a more responsible attitude from Iran in its foreign policy dealings, whether or not that is in Yemen, Syria, or Iraq. That is what unifies them. What divides them, of course, is how to engage with Iran. And if you look at countries such as Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait, they all favor diplomatic engagement with Iran, where Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain, to a certain extent, believe that Trump presents an opportunity to ultimately settle the Iranian question, and they have now put themselves in a situation where they're fully dependent on the Americans for their own protection.
Sigurd Neubauer, thanks very much for sharing with us your thoughts and being with us today. Thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.